My name is Evelyn, and I'm 44 years old. The day my daughter told me not to come to her wedding because I was too poor, something inside me shattered. I can still hear the tremor in her voice, the hesitation right before she said those words as if she knew how deeply they would cut, but said them anyway. I remember standing in my tiny kitchen, the hum of the old refrigerator filling the silence as her voice came through the phone. Lila. My only daughter. My whole world. For most of her life, it had just been the two of us. Her father, Thomas, walked out when she was only 6. He said he was tired of the struggle, that he wanted more from life. I guess I wasn't part of that more. So I became both mother and father. I worked mornings at the diner, evenings cleaning offices, and nights dreaming that all this hard work would give Lila a future brighter than mine. We didn't have much, just a small 2-bedroom apartment with peeling wallpaper and secondhand furniture, but it was ours. I made sure there was always warmth, laughter, and a roof over her head. Every school event, every test, every tear, I was there. I cheered for her louder than anyone else. I believed she was destined for something special. And I wasn't wrong. Lila was brilliant. She earned a full scholarship to a top university, and I couldn't stop crying the day she got the acceptance letter. I remember hugging her so tightly, whispering, "This is what all those sleepless nights were for, baby." But things began to change once she left for college. Her calls became shorter, her visits less frequent. The first time I noticed the distance, she was home for Thanksgiving. She arrived with new clothes, an expensive phone, and an accent in her voice that hadn't been there before. Soft, polished, almost like she was trying to sound like someone else. At first, I brushed it off as her adapting to a new environment. But the truth was harder to ignore with each visit. She'd look uncomfortable when I spoke to her friends, or she'd correct me when I mispronounced something. I told myself it was just her trying to fit in. Still, every time she rolled her eyes or sighed when I mentioned my job, a small part of me withered. When she met Connor, a charming, well-dressed man from a wealthy family, I thought maybe this was her chance at happiness. He seemed polite when we first met, maybe a little distant, but kind enough. I didn't know much about him, only that his family was old money and that Lila wanted desperately to be accepted by them. So when she told me they were getting married, I was thrilled. My baby girl was getting married. I started saving every extra dollar from my cleaning job to buy her a gift, something meaningful, something she could treasure. I even planned to have a dress made, a modest but elegant one, because I wanted to look nice for her big day. Then one afternoon, my phone rang. Her name lit up on the screen, and I answered with a smile. But her tone was off, hesitant, too calm. "Mom," she started, "I need to talk to you about the wedding." I could tell she was nervous, so I tried to ease the tension. "Of course, sweetheart. Is everything okay? Do you need help with the planning?" There was a pause. A long one. Then she exhaled slowly and said, "Mom, I don't think it's a good idea for you to come." At first I thought she was joking. "What? Lila, what are you talking about?" She fumbled for words. "It's just... Connor's family is very particular about appearances. They're traditional. I just don't want you to feel out of place or uncomfortable." Her words felt like a punch to the chest. "Out of place?" I asked softly. "Honey, I'm your mother." "I know," she said quickly, her voice breaking just slightly. "It's not like that, Mom. It's just... people might not understand. You've worked so hard." But she didn't finish. Didn't have to. But that one word carried everything she didn't say aloud. "But you're not like them. But you're poor. But you don't belong." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream, to ask her how she could erase all the years I'd spent building her world with my bare hands. But all that came out was a whisper. "You're ashamed of me." Silence. And then, quietly, "I'm sorry, Mom." I stood there, staring at the peeling wallpaper in my kitchen as tears blurred my vision. The daughter I'd sacrificed everything for didn't want me at her wedding because I wasn't rich enough, elegant enough, or worthy enough. After she hung up, I sank to the floor and cried until I couldn't anymore. I wasn't angry, at least. not yet. Just broken. Empty. But as the hours passed, something shifted inside me. I looked around my little apartment, the same one that had sheltered us for years, and realized how much strength it held. Every crack, every stain, every corner carried the story of a woman who never gave up. That night, I made myself a promise. I would not beg for her acceptance. I would not cry for her approval. But that day, I silently promised myself that she would one day regret calling me too poor. As I sat there, I couldn't help but relive every sleepless night and every missed meal that built the very future she was ashamed of. The phone call from Lila kept replaying in my mind, each word cutting deeper than the last. I sat on the worn couch in my living room, staring blankly at the wall. My hands trembled as I held the phone, still hoping it would ring again and she'd say she didn't mean it, but it never did. The silence told me everything I needed to know. Memories flooded in like waves I couldn't stop. I remembered the winter she turned 8, the one when our heater broke. I wrapped her in blankets and held her close all night, pretending it was a camping adventure. She laughed then, her little teeth chattering, her cheeks rosy. She never knew I cried quietly after she fell asleep, wondering how I would afford the repair. I remembered the year she started middle school, when she came home in tears because other kids mocked her for her thrift store shoes. I worked double shifts that week and surprised her with a brand new pair. I told her they were a gift for getting good grades, but in truth, they were an apology for not being able to give her more. I remembered her high school graduation. She wore the same bright smile I'd always loved, but even then, there was a flicker of something else in her eyes, embarrassment. I saw it when I hugged her on stage, still in my faded waitress uniform because I hadn't had time to change after my morning shift. Her classmates' parents wore suits and pearls. I wore tired hands and the smell of coffee, but I was proud, so proud. I never cared about money. All I wanted was for her to be happy, to have choices I never had. I thought she understood that. When she got her scholarship letter, I remembered dancing around the apartment with her. We had peanut butter sandwiches and cheap champagne that night, the good kind of cheap, the kind that still made you feel rich in spirit. She hugged me and said, "Mom, I'll make you proud." And I told her she already had. Somewhere between that promise and the phone call years later, I lost her. Or maybe she lost herself. I began thinking about how much I'd given the birthdays I worked through, the vacations we never took, the countless times I told her I wasn't hungry so she could have a second helping. Every sacrifice had been made out of love, not obligation. But love, I realized, doesn't always guarantee gratitude. I walked into her old room that night. It still looked almost the same, the faded posters on the wall, the stuffed animals I could never bear to throw away. I sat on her bed and picked up an old photo from her dresser. It was from her first day of a school, her tiny backpack nearly bigger than she was. I was standing next to her, smiling despite the exhaustion written all over my face. Back then, I thought the struggles would end once she grew up. I thought my sacrifices would be rewarded with her success, that she'd remember every small act of love and wear them like invisible armor. But instead, my sacrifices had become her shame. I started questioning myself. Had I done something wrong? Did I make her feel trapped in the shadow of my struggle? Did she see my love as weakness? Then, anger began to replace the sadness. Not the kind that destroys, but the kind that fuels. I realized that I had spent my whole life apologizing for being poor, for not fitting into someone else's idea of success. I had bowed my head in humility so often that I'd forgotten to lift it in pride. But what if I didn't need her approval to feel worthy? What if I could rebuild my life on my own terms, not to prove her wrong, but to remind myself that I had value all along? I made tea and sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker. Somewhere out there, my daughter was planning her dream wedding, the one I wasn't welcome at. I thought about what she might tell people. Maybe she'd say I was busy. Maybe she'd just pretend I didn't exist. But I would exist. Quietly, steadily, I would build something. I didn't know what yet, but I knew this. My story wasn't over. It was only changing direction. I thought about every woman like me, mothers who gave everything and were still told it wasn't enough. I thought about how invisible we become once our children start chasing status. and I promised myself I would not disappear quietly. That night, I opened a small notebook and began writing down ideas, things I'd always wanted to do but never had time for. It wasn't much, just scribbles of hope, but it was a start. I fell asleep with tears drying on my cheeks, not of sadness this time, but determination. My daughter might see me as poor, but I was rich in something money could never buy: grit. For once, I decided to stop apologizing for my life and start rewriting it. It started with a simple act of kindness, one that would completely change my life. The following morning, I went to work at the diner like I always did. It was a Tuesday, the kind of day where nothing ever happens, or so I thought. The bell above the door jingled, and I looked up to see an older man walk in. He was tall, maybe in his late 60s, with kind eyes and a calm presence. He sat at my booth, the one near the window that always got the best morning light. He ordered black coffee and toast, no butter. Simple. Quiet. The kind of customer I liked: polite and patient. Over the next few weeks, he became a regular. Same booth, same order, same gentle smile. He always tipped well but never made small talk beyond the usual pleasantries. Until one rainy evening. The diner was almost empty, and the storm outside was brutal. I noticed him sitting there, staring out the window as thunder rolled. When he finished, he reached for his coat but realized he didn't have an umbrella. Without thinking, I went to the back, grabbed my old one, and handed it to him. "Here," I said. "You'll need this more than I will." He chuckled softly. "You'll get drenched walking home." I shrugged. "I'm used to it. Besides, it's just water." He looked at me for a long moment before taking it. "You remind me of someone," he said quietly. "Someone who believed kindness could fix the world." I smiled awkwardly, unsure what to say. He thanked me and left. I didn't think much of it, just another act of kindness in a long list of small, forgotten gestures. But the next morning, when I came to work, there he was again, waiting for me with a brand new umbrella and a small paper bag. "For you," he said, handing it to me. Inside was a box of pastries and a note that read, "Thank you for reminding me that good people still exist." His name was Mr. Harrington. Over time, he became more than just a customer. We talked during slow hours about books, about music, about life. He told me he was a widower. His wife had passed 10 years ago, and his children lived abroad. He owned several small businesses but lived simply, often preferring quiet places like my little diner. I told him about Lila, about how proud I was of her, even if things were strained. I didn't tell him about the phone call, though. That wound was still too raw. Weeks turned into months. One evening, he asked if I could help him with something. "My assistant retired," he said. "I need someone trustworthy to oversee a few rental properties. It's mostly paperwork and phone calls, but I could use a reliable person." "You strike me as exactly that." I laughed. "Me? I don't know anything about real estate." He smiled. "You know how to manage people. You're organized, responsible, and honest, qualities that are rarer than you think." I hesitated. The offer sounded too good to be true, but something in his eyes told me he meant it sincerely. I agreed to help part-time while keeping my diner shifts. The first week was overwhelming: contracts, invoices, maintenance requests, all things I'd never dealt with before. But Mr. Harrington was patient. He showed me how to read lease agreements, how to handle tenants professionally, and how to balance finances. Slowly, I started to understand. It wasn't easy, but it was fulfilling in a way I hadn't felt in years. I began looking forward to my afternoons at his office. He had a quiet study filled with books, and sometimes we'd just sit in silence, working side by side. He treated me like an equal, not an employee, something I wasn't used to. After a few months, I started earning enough to cut down my diner shifts. I even managed to fix a few things in my apartment that had been broken for years: the leaky faucet, the flickering light. It felt good to stand on solid ground again, not constantly worrying about bills. One day, I stayed late at the office to finish some reports. Mr. Harrington came in with 2 cups of coffee and said, "You know, Evelyn, you have a gift." I looked up from my papers. "A gift? For paperwork?" He chuckled. For people, you handle everything with patience. That's what makes good leaders, not just those who know numbers, but those who understand people. That night, when I walked home under the streetlights, I realized something profound. This wasn't luck. It was the first reward for every hardship I had endured. Life, in its quiet way, was beginning to repay me. My confidence grew. I started reading about business and property management on my own, staying up late like I used to when Lila was a baby, except now, the future I was building was for me. I even opened a small savings account just for emergencies. For the first time, I felt secure. And then one afternoon, as I was locking up the office, Mr. Harrington said something that stayed with me. "You remind me of my late wife," he said softly. "She believed in earning her place in the world, never taking, always building." His words made my throat tighten. For so long, I had seen myself as someone barely holding things together. But maybe, just maybe, I was building something after all. That night, I stood by my window again, but this time I didn't feel the same heaviness. I didn't feel invisible or unwanted. I felt capable, strong. That decision opened a door I never knew existed, one that led me to a life my daughter could never imagine. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving, I was building something. The weeks that followed were a blur of learning, trying, and slowly transforming. I still worked mornings at the diner, but my afternoons and evenings belonged to something entirely new, the world Mr. Harrington had quietly opened for me. His trust in me was something I hadn't experienced in a long time, maybe ever. At first, the transition was terrifying. I was surrounded by people who spoke in terms I didn't understand: liquid assets, net yield, tenant portfolio. I had no idea what half of it meant. But I learned quickly. Mr. Harrington never made me feel foolish for asking questions. He'd sit beside me, explaining every document line by line, as though he truly believed I could master it. And over time, I did. I began organizing the files, handling tenant calls, and managing rent payments with ease. He started giving me more responsibilities, coordinating repairs, reviewing expenses, even negotiating small contracts. He would often watch me with that quiet smile of his, the one that said he knew something I didn't. I found myself enjoying the work more than I'd ever enjoyed anything. There was something empowering about it, the sense of control, the rhythm of solving problems, the satisfaction of seeing results. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Mr. Harrington was more than a mentor. He became a friend. He had this calm way of seeing the best in people. I noticed that his office was filled with old photographs of his wife, of charity events, of community gatherings. He wasn't just wealthy, he was kind. And for some reason, he treated me as though I deserved to be there, as though I belonged. One afternoon, I found the courage to ask him something that had been on my mind. "Why me?" I said. "You could have hired anyone more qualified." He leaned back in his chair, hands folded. "Because qualifications can be taught. Integrity can't. You have that, Evelyn. You don't see it yet, but you will." Those words stuck with me. For years, I'd defined myself by what I didn't have: money, education, status. But for the first time, someone saw what I did have: resilience, compassion, grit. Within a year, my responsibilities had doubled. Mr. Harrington started introducing me to his lawyer and accountant, insisting I learn the ropes of business properly. At first, I was intimidated, sitting at polished conference tables with professionals who wore tailored suits, while I came in with second-hand blouses and sensible shoes. But once I started speaking, something shifted. They listened. They respected me. I wasn't the waitress helping out anymore. I was Evelyn, the property manager. My paycheck reflected that change, too. For the first time, I wasn't counting every penny. I could afford to breathe. I bought new clothes, nothing extravagant, just simple pieces that made me feel confident. I fixed the apartment properly, repainted the walls, replaced the curtains, and even bought a small second-hand car. I'd never owned a car before. When I drove it home that night, I cried in the parking lot, not because of what it cost, but because of what it represented: independence. The diner owner, sweet old Nora, noticed the change in me too. "You've got a glow, Evelyn," she said one morning. "Did you win the lottery or something?" I laughed. "No, just life finally giving me a break." Eventually, I quit the diner job. I was scared to let it go. It had been my safety net for years, but I knew I needed to step fully into this new chapter. Mr. Harrington encouraged me to think bigger. "You have an eye for detail," he told me. "Why not start your own small company? Manage maintenance, cleaning, tenant care, things landlords always need." At first, I thought he was joking. Me? Start a business? But he wasn't. He believed in me when no one else ever had. With his guidance, I registered my own small company, a humble property management and maintenance service. He helped me set it up, but he never handed me success. Every client, every contract, every dollar I earned it. And soon, other property owners began to notice. Word spread quickly about the woman who runs things right. Within months, I was managing multiple buildings, balancing schedules, hiring a small team, and learning how to lead. It was exhausting, but exhilarating. There were moments I'd lie awake at night and think about Lila. About how she'd told me I didn't belong in her world. If only she could see me now, not to rub it in, but to show her that dignity and success don't come from luxury, but from perseverance. One evening, as I locked up my office, Harrington walked in with his familiar, soft smile. "You've done it, Evelyn," he said. "You've built something from the ground up. I hope you're proud of yourself." I nodded, trying not to cry. "I am," I whispered. "For the first time, I really am." He smiled, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Then you've already succeeded." As I drove home that night, city lights reflected off my windshield like stars. I wasn't rich, not by the world's standards, but I had something far more valuable: peace. I no longer felt small, unseen, or unworthy. I was still the same woman who once scraped by to feed her daughter, only now, I was also the woman who could sign her own checks, make her own choices, and stand tall. I wasn't rich yet, but for the first time, I could see a future that didn't hurt. When I received the invitation to Lila's engagement party, I wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry. It arrived in a crisp white envelope embossed with gold lettering, elegant, expensive, and impersonal. "Mr. and Mrs. Connor Whitmore request the pleasure of your company," it began. I noticed the phrasing immediately. Mr. and Mrs. Connor Whitmore. My daughter's name was nowhere to be found on the front of the envelope, just neatly printed inside. It felt more like a corporate announcement than an invitation to a celebration of love. I stared at it for a long time, torn between pride and pain. Pride because she was about to start a new life. Pain because she had made it clear I didn't belong in it. But still, she had sent me the invitation, maybe out of obligation, maybe guilt. I didn't know. For days, I debated whether to go. Part of me wanted to throw it in the trash, to protect myself from more humiliation. But another part, the part that still loved her, despite everything, wanted to see her happy. I told myself I'd go, not for her approval, but to close a chapter. To show her that no matter how she saw me, I could still show up with grace. I spent hours searching for something to wear. I didn't want to look out of place, but I also didn't want to pretend to be someone I wasn't. Eventually, I found a navy blue dress, simple, modest, but beautifully tailored. I paired it with a delicate silver necklace and borrowed a small clutch from one of my employees. It wasn't designer, but it made me feel elegant. I even bought her a gift, a vintage locket engraved with the words, "Love builds what time can't destroy." I thought it might remind her of our bond, even if it had faded. The venue was a grand estate just outside the city, all marble columns and manicured lawns. I arrived early, parking my little sedan among a sea of luxury cars. The moment I stepped inside, I felt the weight of every polished gaze. People dressed in couture and designer suits glanced my way. Their smiles polite but distant. I could almost hear their thoughts. Who is she? Then I saw her. Lila. My beautiful girl. She was radiant in a champagne-colored gown, her hair in soft curls. For a moment, my breath caught in my throat. That was my baby, the same child I used to braid hair for and tuck into bed. When she turned and saw me, her smile faltered just slightly. "Mom," she said, approaching with careful politeness, "you came." "I wouldn't miss it," I replied, my voice soft but steady. "Hand. You look nice," she said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her fiancé, Connor, came over. Tall, well-groomed, the kind of man who radiated confidence. "Lila," he said, placing a hand on her waist. "Are you going to introduce me?" Lila hesitated for the briefest moment. "Connor, this is Evelyn. She paused. "A family friend." The words hit me like a knife. I smiled anyway, swallowing the ache. "It's lovely to meet you, Connor," I said, extending my hand. He shook it politely but distractedly, already turning to greet another guest. Lila shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. I tried to make conversation, to blend in, but it was clear I didn't belong. The guests talked about European vacations, art collections, and stock portfolios, languages I'd never spoken. When they asked what I did, I simply said, "I run a small property management company." That was true, but it didn't seem to impress them. Their smiles were tight, their nods dismissive. At one point, Connor's mother approached me. Impeccably dressed, diamond earrings sparkling. She gave me a once-over before smiling with thin lips. "And how do you know the Whitmores, dear?" I could tell from her tone she already knew or thought she did. "I'm Lila's mother," I said simply. Her expression froze. "Oh," she said. Her voice pitched an octave higher. "How lovely." The silence that followed was suffocating. I excused myself and walked to the bar, pretending to be busy with my drink. My chest ached, but I refused to let anyone see it. I stayed for an hour, long enough to congratulate them, give Lila her gift, and smile through the sting of being invisible at my own daughter's celebration. When I finally decided to leave, Lila barely noticed. She was surrounded by guests, laughter, and champagne. As I walked to my car, the night air felt colder than before. I sat behind the wheel, my hands trembling, trying not to cry. I'd thought I'd grown stronger, but nothing could have prepared me for that kind of rejection, the kind where you're not even seen as family anymore. I started the engine and looked at my reflection in the mirror. I didn't see a failure or a poor woman anymore. I saw someone who had endured every possible heartbreak and still stood tall. Driving home, I whispered to myself, "You've survived worse, Evelyn. You'll survive this too." By the time I reached my apartment, the tears had stopped. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat in silence, thinking about everything that had happened. That night, something hardened inside me, not bitterness, but resolve. I realized that no amount of humiliation could break me unless I allowed it to. I didn't need their approval, their wealth, or their invitations. I had built myself from nothing once, and I could do it again, stronger this time. That night, I vowed it would be the last time anyone made me feel small. When Mr. Harrington asked to meet me for dinner, I never expected what he was about to say. It was a quiet Friday evening, and I had just finished a long week of managing tenants, invoices, and meetings. I was exhausted, but when he called and said, "Evelyn, I'd like to take you somewhere nice tonight," I couldn't say no. His voice carried a warmth that always made me feel seen, not as an employee, but as a person. He picked me up in his car, a sleek black sedan that always smelled faintly of cedar and leather. The restaurant he chose was elegant but not flashy, the kind of place where time seemed to slow down. He held the door open for me, and as we sat across from each other, the soft candlelight flickered against the lines of his face, lines carved by time, wisdom, and kindness. We talked easily, as we always did. He asked about my week, and I told him about a particularly troublesome tenant who refused to pay rent but complained about every minor issue. He laughed, softly, shaking his head. "You handle chaos better than anyone I know," he said. "You have a gift for finding calm in storms." I smiled, sipping my tea. "Maybe because storms are all I've ever known." His eyes softened, the way they always did when I let my guard down. We finished dinner, and when dessert came, He reached into his jacket and placed a small velvet box on the table. My breath caught. "Evelyn," he began, his tone steady but gentle. "You've changed my life in ways I can't begin to describe. You've reminded me what decency, honesty, and perseverance look like. You've brought light back into my days." I stared at him, my heart racing. "Mr. Harrington, please," he said, interrupting softly. "Call me Robert." That was the first time he'd ever asked me to do that. He smiled faintly, opening the box. Inside was a simple gold ring, elegant, understated, beautiful. Nothing about it screamed wealth, but everything about it whispered sincerity. He continued, "Evelyn, I've lived a long life. I've built businesses, lost loved ones, and seen people come and go. But I've never met anyone like you. You've restored my faith in goodness. I don't want to spend another day without you by my side." I was frozen, unsure how to respond. My mind flooded with 1,000 thoughts. "Robert, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," he said simply, his eyes glistening. "Not because of what I have, but because of who you are when you're with me. I want a partner, a friend, a wife, not someone to impress, but someone to share peace with." Tears welled in my eyes. For so long, I'd been invisible to the world, a struggling single mother, a background character in everyone else's story. But here was a man who saw me, truly saw me, and didn't want to change a single thing. "Robert," I whispered, my voice trembling, "you've given me opportunities I never dreamed of. You've treated me with respect and kindness. But marriage? I never imagined." He reached across the table, taking my hand gently. "Evelyn, you deserve every good thing this world has to offer. You've spent your life giving, now it's time for someone to give back to you." I couldn't stop the tears. For years, I'd thought love was something meant for other people, people with easier lives, smoother stories. But maybe love came when you least expected it, when you'd already accepted that you'd never find it. That night I said yes. Not because of comfort or security, but because, for the first time, someone loved me without conditions. The wedding was quiet, just a few close friends, no extravagance. He didn't want to overwhelm me, and I didn't want attention. We exchanged vows in his garden, surrounded by roses his late wife had planted years ago. As I stood there, holding his hands, I felt peace wash over me. Moving into his estate was surreal. I'd gone from a small apartment to a home that felt like something out of a dream. But what surprised me most wasn't the luxury, it was the warmth. The staff adored Robert, and soon they grew to love me too. I treated them as equals, not subordinates, and that respect returned tenfold. In the months that followed, Robert and I worked side by side, running his businesses together. He taught me more than I could have ever learned in a classroom. He encouraged my ideas, supported my independence, and insisted I never lose the fire that made me who I was. I reinvested in my company, expanding it, hiring women who reminded me of myself, hardworking, overlooked, determined. I wasn't just managing properties anymore. I was building a future, a legacy. There were nights when I'd look out over the vast garden, the city lights in the distance, and think about the woman I used to be, the one who cried on the kitchen floor after being called too poor. That woman had fought her way here, and though I had more than I'd ever dreamed of, I didn't forget where I came from. Robert often said, "You're the best decision I ever made." But truthfully, he was the best blessing I never saw coming. I had found love, respect, and stability, everything I once thought life had denied me. Months later, an invitation arrived in the mail, embossed, elegant, and full of irony. It was another wedding invitation. This time, it was for Lila's actual wedding day. I remember standing by the mail table in Robert's study, turning the thick ivory envelope over in my hands. For a moment, I thought it was a mistake. She had told me not to come, made it painfully clear that I didn't belong. And yet, here it was, my name written neatly in gold lettering. Mrs. Evelyn Harrington. The name looked strange and beautiful on paper, like it belonged to someone else. I smiled faintly. Maybe Lila had just sent it out of politeness, a gesture more than an invitation. But something in me stirred curiosity. Maybe even hope. Robert came into the room just then, carrying his reading glasses. "What's that, my dear?" he asked. "It's my daughter's wedding invitation," I said quietly. He set the glasses down and studied my face. "The same daughter who told you not to attend?" I nodded, still staring at the envelope. "Yes, the very one." He gave a small smile, that knowing kind of smile he had when he could already read my thoughts. "And how do you feel about it?" I hesitated before answering. "Conflicted. Part of me wants to go to see her, to see if she's happy. Another part of me doesn't want to put myself through that humiliation again." Robert walked closer and gently took my hand. "Evelyn, forgiveness doesn't mean weakness. Sometimes showing up with grace is the strongest thing you can do." His words stayed with me long after he left the room. That night, I sat by the fireplace, turning the invitation over and over. Lila had no idea about my new life, about Robert, or the woman I had become. She still thought I was scraping by, struggling to make ends meet. She had no idea that I now ran my own company, that I managed multiple properties, or that I had remarried. I could have told her, of course. I could have sent her photos, updates, even letters. But something inside me had wanted her to come to that realization on her own, to see, one day, what she had turned her back on. Robert noticed my silence as the days went on. "One evening," he said, "if you decide to go, we'll go together." I looked up, surprised. "Robert, I can't ask you to do that. It's her day." And he cut me off with a gentle laugh. "You're my wife. That makes her my family. Whether she realizes it or not. If you go, we go. And I'll make sure you arrive in style." I knew what that meant, the Rolls-Royce. His favorite car, the one he almost never used except for special occasions. I smiled, half in disbelief. "Robert, that's not necessary." "Maybe not," he said, smiling softly, "but it'll be fun." A few days before the wedding, I decided to send a small gift to Lila, a handwritten note and a delicate bracelet I had bought months earlier. The note was simple: "Wishing you a lifetime of happiness and courage to love deeply." I didn't mention anything about coming. I wanted my presence. If I went, to be a surprise, not to cause drama, but to make a quiet statement. The morning of the wedding, I woke before sunrise. I chose a soft cream-colored dress with a matching hat and pearl earrings, elegant but understated. I didn't want to overshadow anyone. I just wanted to feel like myself. When I came downstairs, Robert was waiting by the door, looking dapper in a tailored suit. He smiled as he saw me. "You look stunning, Evelyn. She won't know what hit her." I laughed nervously. "That's not the goal." He chuckled, offering his arm. "Perhaps not, but let's show her what dignity looks like." The drive to the venue felt surreal. I watched the city blur past, my reflection flickering in the tinted window. My stomach churned, not from fear, but from the weight of years of hurt slowly dissolving into something else: resolve. The Rolls-Royce glided smoothly down the long driveway of the venue. I recognized it instantly, the same estate where they'd held the engagement party. I hadn't been back since that night of humiliation, but this time, everything was different. I wasn't the struggling waitress who had been introduced as a family friend. I was Evelyn Harrington, business owner, wife, and woman of quiet power. As we approached, I noticed guests turning to look. The car alone was enough to draw attention. The chauffeur stepped out, walked to my door, and opened it with practiced grace. Robert extended his hand to help me out. I took it, stepping onto the gravel drive, the sunlight catching the pearls on my wrist. Conversations hushed. People's gazes followed us as we made our way toward the entrance. I felt every stare, every whisper. But this time, instead of shrinking under it, I stood taller. And then, I saw her, Lila, standing near the entrance, greeting guests. When her eyes met mine, her smile froze. Confusion flickered across her face, followed by disbelief. She blinked, as if unsure of what she was seeing. I could almost read her thoughts. Who is that woman? Why is she arriving in a Rolls-Royce? Her fiancé, Connor, turned to see what she was looking at. His expression changed instantly when he spotted Robert. Recognition flashed in his eyes. He hurried over, extending a hand. "Mr. Harrington," he said, his voice suddenly respectful. "It's an honor to see you here." Robert shook his hand warmly. "The honor's mine. I wouldn't miss this for the world." Connor looked at me. Realization dawning. "You're Mrs. Harrington?" I smiled, politely. "Yes, Evelyn Harrington." Lila's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. The color drained from her face. Robert placed his hand gently on my back, guiding me forward. "Shall we?" he said softly. I nodded, my heart steady, my chin lifted. I didn't know it yet, but that car ride would become the moment my daughter's world turned upside down. When the silver Rolls-Royce pulled up to the grand venue, every head turned, including my daughter's. The hum of the engine stopped, and for a few seconds, the world seemed to still. The chauffeur stepped out first, his crisp uniform and polished shoes glinting under the morning sun. He circled around the car, opened the door, and extended a gloved hand toward me. As I stepped out, the breeze lifted the brim of my hat, and a soft murmur rippled through the crowd. The sunlight hit the pearl buttons of my cream-colored dress just right, casting a glow that made me feel radiant not because of luxury, but because for the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged wherever I stood. Robert emerged behind me. Dignified and calm, his presence commanding quiet respect. Guests began whispering his name. I caught fragments of it. "Is that Robert Harrington? The businessman? He owns half the properties downtown." The whispers grew louder as realization spread through the crowd like wildfire. And then, there was Lila. She stood frozen at the top of the marble steps, her bouquet trembling slightly in her hand. Her face was pale, her smile faltering. She looked from the Rolls-Royce to Robert, then to me, her mother, the woman she had called too poor to attend. Her eyes widened as recognition slowly dawned. I met her gaze steadily. I didn't smile, didn't gloat, I simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement that said, "Yes, it's me. And I'm doing just fine." "You look breathtaking, Evelyn," he whispered as we made our way toward the steps. "Thank you," I murmured, though my heart was pounding. Every step felt like the closing of a painful chapter I'd carried for too long. Connor's parents, the Whitmores, were standing near the entrance. The moment they spotted Robert, their demeanor shifted instantly. Mrs. Whitmore, who had once looked down on me with that tight, condescending smile, suddenly brightened. "Mr. Harrington," she exclaimed, moving forward eagerly. "What a wonderful surprise." Robert smiled politely. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Whitmore. I believe you know my wife, Evelyn." The word wife hit like a thunderclap. I could almost hear the collective gasp around us. Mrs. Whitmore's smile froze mid-expression as her gaze darted between Robert and me. "Your wife?" she repeated, her tone wobbling slightly. "Yes," Robert said firmly, his arms still around mine. "We've been married for several months now." I watched as her expression shifted shock, disbelief, and then forced warmth. "Oh, how lovely. Congratulations," she stammered. "I had no idea." "I imagine you didn't," I said softly, my voice calm but measured. Connor stepped forward, clearly nervous. "Mr. Harrington, this is such an honor. I didn't realize you were related to—" Robert interrupted kindly. "Through marriage, yes, Evelyn is my wife, which makes her the mother of the bride." That last phrase seemed to hang in the air, echoing louder than any speech could. Lila's face went crimson. She looked down, biting her lip, unable to meet anyone's eyes. For the first time, she wasn't the one people admired. I was. As Robert and I entered the hall, people made space for us, greeting us with respectful nods and warm smiles. The same crowd that once ignored me now wanted to shake my hand, ask about my work, my company, my marriage. It wasn't their approval that made me proud, it was the fact that I didn't need it anymore. When the ceremony began, I sat quietly in the front row, my hands folded in my lap. Lila kept glancing at me from the altar, her expression a mixture of confusion and shame. I didn't want her to feel humiliated, only to understand. To see that the woman she had dismissed had never been beneath her, only behind her, pushing her forward. As she walked down the aisle, she looked stunning, every inch the elegant bride she'd dreamed of being. And yet, I saw the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, the awareness that appearances could change, that status could shift in a heartbeat. After the ceremony, when the photographer called for family pictures, there was a tense pause. Everyone waited to see how Lila would handle it. Finally, she turned toward me, her voice trembling just slightly. "Mom, would you like to join us?" For a moment, I almost said no. But then, I saw the little girl in her eyes, the one who used to cling to my apron and call me her hero. So I smiled softly and stepped forward. As we stood together, side by side, I felt Robert's reassuring presence behind me. He placed a gentle hand on my shoulder as the photographer snapped the picture. And in that instant, I realized something profound. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. My presence alone was proof enough. Later, as guests mingled during the reception, I overheard conversations that would have once embarrassed me, but this time, they didn't sting, they amused me. "She's married to Robert Harrington?" "Yes, and she runs her own company, apparently." "My goodness, I thought she was just what?" Someone else interrupted. "Clearly not who you assumed." I sipped my champagne quietly, letting their words drift into the background. I didn't need to say a thing. My dignity spoke louder than any revenge ever could. When I caught Lila's gaze again, she looked away quickly, her eyes glistening. I knew that look, regret mixed with realization. And though part of me wanted to hold on to the bitterness, another part, the mother in me, just felt sad for her. For the first time, my daughter looked at me not with shame but with awe. Her eyes told a story her lips couldn't: regret, confusion, and something that looked like shame. After the ceremony, the crowd poured into the reception hall, laughter, music, and clinking glasses filling the air. I could feel eyes still following me as I moved through the room, but I wasn't nervous anymore. I carried myself with quiet confidence, the kind that comes from knowing you've already faced your worst days and survived them. Lila, on the other hand, seemed restless. She moved from guest to guest with a practiced smile, but her glances kept returning to me. I saw her watching me from across the room, the way her brow furrowed when Robert leaned in to whisper something that made me laugh, the way her jaw tightened when people surrounded me, eager to speak with the mysterious Mrs. Harrington. Finally, after nearly an hour, she approached. Her steps were slow, hesitant. "Mom," she said softly, her voice trembling, "can we talk?" Robert gave me a reassuring nod. "I'll be nearby," he said quietly, then walked off to speak with Connor's father. Lila led me toward the garden outside, away from the music and the chatter. The cool air was a relief. Strings of fairy lights hung from the trees, their glow reflected in the nearby pond. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. The silence stretched between us, heavy with years of things unsaid. Finally she spoke. "You look incredible," she said, her words cautious. "Thank you," I replied, keeping my tone even. "It's been a long road to get here." Her eyes darted to the diamond band on my finger, then to the pearl earrings. "I had no idea you remarried," she said quietly. "Or that you knew Mr. Harrington," I nodded. "You wouldn't have. We lost touch, remember?" She looked down, guilt flashing across her face. "Mom, I didn't mean to hurt me?" I interrupted softly. "Maybe not intentionally, but you did." Tears welled in her eyes. I was so embarrassed back then. I wanted to fit in, to be accepted by Connor's family. I thought if I pretended to be someone else, it would make me worthy. I sighed. "Worthy of what, Lila?" "Love doesn't need costumes or lies. If people only value you when you pretend, then you're not loved, you're tolerated." Her chin trembled. "I know, I realize that now. Seeing you today walking out of that car, everyone looking at you with respect, I felt." She stopped, searching for words. "I felt ashamed, not of you, of myself." I softened a little. "It's not shame you need, sweetheart, it's growth. I've been where you are thinking money could fix everything, that respect could be bought. But life has a way of teaching us that the things that matter most can't be measured in price tags. She looked at me with wide, tear-filled eyes. I'm sorry, Mom. I really am. You didn't deserve the way I treated you. You were always there for me, and I held up my hand gently. You don't need to apologize forever, Lila. I forgave you the moment you hung up that phone. Not because you earned it, but because I didn't want that bitterness to poison me. She blinked, confused. You forgave me? Just like that? I smiled faintly. I had to. Carrying anger only makes you heavy. And I've carried enough in my life. Her shoulders shook as she tried to hold back tears. You're so much stronger than I'll ever be. I shook my head. No, you're strong too, you just forgot where you came from. The girl I raised wasn't shallow. She was brave, curious, full of heart. That girl's still in there, Lila. You just need to let her back out. We stood there for a long time, the sounds of the party faint in the word, distance. Then she said, barely above a whisper, I was wrong to be ashamed of you. I touched her cheek softly, my own eyes misting. You should never be ashamed of love, Lila. It's the reason you are who you are. From the corner of my eye, I saw Connor watching us from the terrace. His expression was unreadable, a mixture of discomfort and curiosity. He wasn't used to seeing emotion, not like this. I wondered if he'd ever understand it. Lila took a shaky breath. I don't know how to make this right. I smiled gently. You just did. By being honest. For the first time that day, I saw her shoulders relax. The tension that had bound her for years seemed to ease. She leaned forward and hugged me tightly, desperately the way she used to when she was little. For a moment, I didn't care who saw us. I just held my daughter again. When we finally pulled away, she looked lighter, her face softer. You really are happy, aren't you? She asked. Yes, I said, nodding. But not because of money, or a big house, or a fancy car. I'm happy because I finally learned my worth doesn't depend on anyone else's approval. Lila smiled through her tears. I think I needed to see that. I squeezed her hand. Then maybe this wedding gave us both something we didn't expect. As we walked back toward the reception hall, the music swelled, and laughter filled the air again. But this time, it sounded different, lighter, freer. Lila's steps beside me were hesitant but hopeful. When we reached the door, she paused and whispered, Thank you, Mom. For everything. For forgiving me. I smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. That's what mothers do, sweetheart. We love even when it hurts. And as we stepped back into the crowd together, side by side, I could feel the invisible walls between us finally begin to crumble. In that moment, I saw her pride crumble and maybe her heart start to heal. I thought the day's surprises were over. But fate had one more twist for us. After my conversation with Lila, I felt lighter, like a burden I'd been carrying for years had finally fallen away. The reception hall glowed under crystal chandeliers, the air humming with laughter, music, and the faint clinking of champagne glasses. I took a seat beside Robert, my hand resting gently over his. We didn't need words, just one look between us said everything: pride, relief, peace. Guests mingled all around us, their curiosity about me still palpable. Some tried to act subtle as they asked about my work or complimented my dress, but I could feel the underlying surprise in every question. A few even tried to impress me with small talk about real estate or investments, clearly realizing I wasn't who they thought I was. I smiled through it all, choosing grace over satisfaction. I didn't need to prove anything. Soon, dinner was served, and the speeches began. Connor's father stood up first, a tall, silver-haired man with a deep, confident voice that commanded the room. He began the usual pleasantries, thanking everyone for coming, praising the newlyweds, and reminiscing about family values and tradition. But then, unexpectedly, his tone shifted. Before I continue, he said, glancing toward our table, I'd like to extend a very special welcome to one of our most respected business partners, Mr. Robert Harrington, and his lovely wife, Evelyn. The murmurs started instantly. Heads turned in our direction. I felt the weight of 100 eyes, but this time, it didn't make me shrink. It made me sit taller. Connor's father continued, smiling warmly. Robert has been a cornerstone in many of our company's projects over the years. His integrity and leadership have shaped this community in countless ways. And Evelyn, he paused, looking directly at me, has built an incredible reputation of her own. Her property management firm has been quietly transforming the way people do business in this city. Together, they're an inspiring pair. The applause that followed was genuine, respectful, even admiring. Robert nodded graciously, and I smiled politely. But inside, my heart was beating so fast I could barely breathe. I hadn't expected that kind of public acknowledgement. Across the table, I caught Lila's eyes. She looked stunned, her mouth slightly open. Connor squeezed her hand, whispering something in her ear, but she didn't respond. For the first time in a long while, she was seeing me, really seeing me, not as the woman who'd struggled to make ends meet, but as someone who had quietly rebuilt her life into something remarkable. When the applause died down, Robert leaned toward me and whispered, "You've earned every bit of that." I smiled, whispering back, "So have you." After the speeches, the dance floor filled quickly. Lila and Connor shared their first dance as husband and wife, the crowd watching with soft smiles and tearful eyes. I watched too, and though part of me still ached from the years of distance, another part was deeply proud. My little girl was a woman now, flawed, yes, but learning. When the music changed to a slower tune, Robert extended his hand toward me. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Harrington?" I laughed softly, my cheeks warm. "You may, Mr. Harrington." We danced slowly, swaying under the chandeliers as the music wrapped around us. He held me close but gently, as though reminding me that life could still be tender after all the hardness I'd known. As we danced, I noticed Connor's parents watching us, whispering to one another. There was no mockery this time, no condescension, only a quiet respect. I caught Mrs. Whitmore's eye, and she smiled, genuine and humble. I nodded back, a silent truce between two women who had both misjudged each other. When the song ended, people began approaching us again. This time, their questions weren't patronizing, they were curious, admiring. "I had no idea you were in the business world," one woman said. "Your story must be fascinating." Another added, "It's inspiring to see a woman build herself up like that." I thanked them kindly, but what touched me most wasn't the attention, it was the shift in energy. For the first time, I wasn't the outsider in the room. I was part of it, not because of money, but because I had earned respect through resilience. Later in the evening, Robert was called up to give a brief toast. When he took the microphone, he cleared his throat, smiling at the crowd. "Thank you all for your kind words," he began. "It's been wonderful to watch this beautiful union today. Love, in its purest form, isn't about what we have, it's about what we give. And I can tell you this, the woman sitting beside me has given more of herself than anyone I've ever met." All eyes turned to me again, and I felt my cheeks flush. Robert continued, "Evelyn taught me that success isn't measured in possessions, but in character. And if you're lucky enough to meet someone like her, hold on to them, they'll change your life." Applause erupted again. My eyes stung with tears, and I had to look down for a moment just to steady myself. I wasn't used to being celebrated. I wasn't used to being seen. Lila came up to me after the toast, her expression soft. "Mom," she said quietly, "he's right about you." I smiled through the tears, threatening to fall. "Maybe now you understand why I never needed to prove anything." She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "I do." As the night drew to a close, I sat beside Robert, watching everyone dance and laugh. The lights glowed warm and golden, and I felt an overwhelming sense of calm. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I was finally free, not because I'd gotten revenge, but because I'd reclaimed my worth. For the first time, I didn't feel like the poor mother at the wedding, I felt like the woman I was always meant to be. Days after the wedding, Lila showed up at my doorstep, this time without the arrogance. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon, the kind I had come to love. Robert was reading in his favorite chair, sunlight spilling across the living room floor. I was in the garden trimming roses when I heard the crunch of gravel in the driveway. I looked up and saw a familiar figure standing near the gate, hands nervously clutching her purse. Lila. For a second, I froze. My instinct was to brace myself for whatever she might say, but her posture told me everything. She wasn't here to impress anyone. She was here because something inside her had shifted. I wiped my hands on my gardening apron and opened the gate. Lila, I said softly. You found me. She gave a shaky laugh, her eyes glistening. It wasn't hard. People don't stop talking about Mrs. Harrington these days. I smiled gently. Come in. She hesitated before stepping forward. When she entered the garden, she looked around slowly, taking in the lush flowers, the winding stone path, the fountain Robert had built. It's beautiful here, she said. Thank you. It's peaceful, I replied. We walked toward the patio, where Robert was now standing by the door. Lila, he greeted warmly, his tone kind and sincere. It's good to see you. She smiled faintly, surprised by his warmth. Thank you, Mr. Harrington. Please, call me Robert, he said. Would you like some tea? She nodded, and the three of us sat down at the patio table. For a few moments, there was only the soft sound of birds and the trickle of the fountain. Then she spoke. I've been trying to find the right words to say, she began, her voice trembling. But there aren't any good ones for how sorry I am. I took a slow sip of my tea before answering. You don't have to say the perfect thing, Lila. Just say what you feel. Tears filled her eyes. I was awful to you, Mom. I treated you like you weren't good enough, like you were a burden. And seeing you that day walking out of that car, everyone looking at you with respect, it made me realize how wrong I was. You weren't the one who wasn't enough. I was. Her words broke something open inside me. For years, I'd dreamed of hearing an apology, but now that it was here, I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt relieved. Lila, I said gently, you were young. You got swept up in a world that values appearance over substance. I can't say it didn't hurt, but I understand. She shook her head, tears rolling down her cheeks. You shouldn't have to understand. You did everything for me. You gave me everything, and I repaid you with shame. I reached across the table and took her hand. You repaid me with a reason to keep going. I worked hard because I wanted you to have more. I never did it for thanks. Robert listened quietly, a small smile of admiration on his face. You raised a strong woman, Evelyn, he said softly. Lila looked at him, her voice unsteady. She's the strongest person I've ever known. I don't know how you could ever forgive me. Because forgiveness isn't about you, I said, squeezing her hand gently. It's about freeing myself. I've lived enough years in pain. I don't want to carry bitterness anymore. She nodded, crying silently. I don't deserve you. I smiled faintly. That's where you're wrong. You'll always deserve love, Lila. But love doesn't mean there are no consequences. You lost something in those years we didn't talk, moments we can't get back. But that doesn't mean we can't build new ones. Robert stood and poured her another cup of tea, giving her a fatherly smile. You're welcome here anytime, Lila, he said kindly. This home isn't just Evelyn's, it's yours too, if you want it. Her eyes widened in surprise, and for a moment, she was speechless. Thank you, she whispered. After tea, I took her on a tour of the estate. We walked through the garden, the stables, and finally my small office where I handled business calls. She stopped at the bookshelf lined with framed photos, pictures of me and Robert, of properties we'd restored, and of me cutting a ribbon at my company's first office opening. You've built an incredible life, she said softly. I looked at the photos and smiled. Yes, but it didn't happen overnight. It took years of small, quiet steps and a lot of faith. She turned to me, eyes shining. I want to learn from you, not just about business, about strength and forgiveness. I want to be more like you. That was the moment I truly forgave her, not because she asked for it, but because she meant it. The little girl I raised was still there after all. Later, as the sun began to set, Lila hugged me again, tighter this time. I love you, Mom, she whispered. I closed my eyes and held her. I love you too, sweetheart. Always have, always will. When she left that evening, Robert put his arm around me and said softly, "I think she finally sees who you really are." I smiled, my heart full. Maybe now she'll see who she really is, too. As we stood there, watching her car disappear down the long driveway, I realized something I hadn't before. Revenge hadn't healed me. Time hadn't healed me. Forgiveness had. Sometimes, the sweetest revenge is forgiveness, because it frees your soul before it humbles theirs. I never wanted riches, I wanted respect, and somehow, life gave me both. In the months that followed Lila's visit, something beautiful began to take shape between us. The tension that had once filled every silence was gone, replaced by warmth, laughter, and the gentle rhythm of rebuilding what we had almost lost. She started visiting every weekend, bringing small gifts from the city, flowers, pastries, and sometimes just herself, with stories to tell and apologies she no longer needed to repeat. It felt strange at first, hearing her call me Mom again without hesitation. There was no pride in her tone now, no shame either, just love. It was as if we had both been waiting years to exhale. One morning while we were having breakfast in the garden, she said, "Mom, I've been thinking. I want to do something that matters, something real. Like what you've built." I smiled. "And what do you have in mind?" She hesitated, then said, "I've been volunteering at a community center near our place. Most of the women there are single moms trying to make ends meet. They remind me of you. And I want to help them somehow." Those words touched me more deeply than she knew. "That's a beautiful idea, Lila. Maybe we can help together." And so we did. With Robert's help and my own growing business network, we started a small program for single mothers, women who wanted to learn skills, start businesses, and build financial independence. It began with just a handful of women meeting twice a week in a rented office space downtown. But within months, it grew beyond anything we expected. We named it the New Start Initiative. The mission was simple: to give women like me a chance to rise, to be seen, to be respected. Every week, I stood in front of those women and told them my story, not as a tale of revenge, but of resilience. I told them about the long nights, the tears, the humiliation, and how all of it shaped the woman I became. I watched their faces light up with recognition because they understood. They had been there too. Lila often helped with the sessions, bringing her warmth and charm to the women who needed it most. Watching her work with them filled me with pride I can't describe. She was finally using her voice not to impress, but to uplift. One afternoon, after one of our workshops, Robert came by to visit. He stood quietly in the back as I spoke to the group about the importance of dignity and self-worth. Afterward, he walked up to me, smiling. "You were born to do this, Evelyn," he said. "You've turned your pain into purpose." I looked around the room, at the women laughing and talking, at Lila helping one of them with a resume, and I realized he was right. The legacy I was building wasn't measured in money or titles, it was measured in lives touched, in hearts mended. As the program expanded, we began offering grants for small businesses, sewing shops, bakeries, cleaning services, childcare centers. Every time one of those women opened a door with their name on it, I felt like I was watching a piece of myself being reborn. The local newspaper eventually ran a story about our initiative, calling it a revolution in resilience. They featured a photo of me and Lila, standing side by side, smiling. When the article was published, Lila called me crying. "Mom," she said, "I finally understand what strength looks like. It looks like you." Those words meant more than any award ever could. Robert continued to be my biggest supporter. He attended every event, donated quietly to fund new projects, and made sure I never lost sight of balance. At home, he'd tease me gently, saying, "You're becoming quite the celebrity, Mrs. Harrington. I'll have to start making appointments just to have dinner with you." I'd laugh and reply, "Only if you promise to book early." Through it all, I made sure to stay grounded. I never forgot where I came from: the diner, the late nights, the years of scraping by. I often returned to my old neighborhood, bringing care packages to struggling families or mentoring young mothers who reminded me of my younger self. It was my way of keeping my roots alive, of honoring the woman I used to be. Lila and I grew closer, and with every passing month. We started spending Sundays cooking together, a tradition we hadn't shared since she was a little girl. She'd tell me about her marriage, her fears, her hopes. We laughed more than we cried, and for once, it felt like we were both exactly where we were meant to be. One evening, as we were cleaning up after dinner, she said something that stayed with me forever. "Mom, I used to think success was about being admired. Now I realize it's about being remembered for kindness, for strength, for how you made people feel." I looked at her, my heart swelling with pride. "Then I'd say you've already found success." She smiled, and for the first time in years, I saw the same sparkle in her eyes she had as a child, pure, hopeful, and unguarded. As I watched her drive away that night, I stood by the window and whispered to myself, "We did it." We had come full circle, two women scarred by pride, healed by love, and united by purpose. My daughter once called me poor, but now, she calls me her inspiration. Just when I thought life had settled into peace, an unexpected visitor brought back old memories. It was a chilly Thursday morning, and I was reviewing some documents for our women's initiative when the housekeeper announced that someone was at the gate asking for me. I wasn't expecting anyone. Robert was out meeting with one of his business partners, and Lila had called earlier to say she'd visit over the weekend. "Who is it?" I asked, without looking up from my paperwork. The housekeeper hesitated. "He says his name is Thomas." The pen slipped from my fingers. For a moment, I just sat there, frozen. Thomas. I hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in years. My ex-husband, the man who had walked out on me and our daughter when she was just 6. The man who left us with nothing but a pile of unpaid bills and broken promises. I stood slowly, my heart thudding in my chest. "Show him in," I said quietly. He entered the sitting room a few minutes later. Time had not been kind to him. His hair was gray and unkempt, his clothes worn, and his eyes, once full of charm, looked tired and defeated. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Two people linked by history but separated by everything that came after. "Evelyn," he said softly. "You look different." "I am different," I replied. "What are you doing here, Thomas?" He sighed, sinking into the nearest chair as if the weight of his past had finally caught up to him. "I heard about you, about the company, the marriage, all of it. You've done well for yourself." I crossed my arms. "That surprises you?" He shook his head. "No, I always knew you were strong. I just didn't expect to see it from this side of life." Something in his tone made me uneasy. "What do you want, Thomas?" I asked. He hesitated before speaking. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need help. Things haven't been easy. I lost my job last year. My health isn't great. And, well, I have nowhere else to go." There it was, the request I'd known was coming. Part of me wanted to laugh at the irony. The man who once left me because he wanted more from life was now standing in front of me asking for help. Still, I didn't answer right away. I sat down across from him, studying his face. There was no arrogance left in him. No charm. Just weariness. "Do you have family?" I asked. He shook his head. "No one who'd take me in." "And what exactly are you asking for?" "Just a place to stay for a while," he said quietly. "Until I get back on my feet." I took a deep breath. Memories flooding in the nights. I cried myself to sleep. The days I skipped meals so Lila could eat. The humiliation of watching him walk away without looking back. I had built my entire life from the ashes of what he destroyed. "Thomas," I said slowly, "when you left, you didn't just abandon me. You abandoned your daughter. Do you even know what that did to her?" His face fell. "I know," he whispered. "I've lived with that guilt every day. I was a coward. I thought I could start over, but I never did. I ruined everything." Silence filled the room. I could feel the old anger rising, but beneath it, there was something else: pity. Not love, not longing. Just a quiet, distant pity for a man who had never learned how to value what mattered. Just then, Robert returned. He walked in, calm as ever, and immediately sensed the tension in the room. "Everything all right, my dear?" he asked. I nodded slightly. "This is Thomas," I said. "Lila's father." Robert extended a polite hand, his expression unreadable. "Ah, yes. I've heard about you." Thomas took his hand awkwardly. "You must be the husband," he said, his voice uneasy. "That's right," Robert replied. "And you must be the man who taught Evelyn what she didn't deserve." The words hung in the air. There was no malice in Robert's tone, just quiet truth. Thomas looked down, unable to respond. After a moment, Robert turned to me. "Would you like me to handle this?" he asked softly. I shook my head. "No. This is mine to finish." I looked back at Thomas. "I'll give you something to help you get back on your feet. But not a place to stay. You'll have to find your own way forward." He nodded slowly, shame flickering across his face. "I understand. I don't deserve your kindness." I stood, retrieving my checkbook. "This isn't kindness, Thomas. It's closure." I wrote an amount that would be enough for him to rent a small place and buy food for a while. When I handed him the check, his hands trembled. "Thank you," he murmured. "For this, and for not throwing me out." I looked at him, calm but firm. "I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for the woman you left behind, the one who doesn't live in anger anymore." He nodded, tears filling his eyes. "You've become someone extraordinary, Evelyn. I wish I'd realized that back then." As he left, I felt the final remnants of old pain lift from my chest. I didn't hate him anymore. He was a closed chapter, one that no longer had power over me. That evening, when Lila came by and I told her what happened, she was stunned. "You helped him?" she asked. "I did," I said simply. "Because I needed to be free of him." Forgiveness doesn't mean letting someone back in your life, Lila. It just means you're done letting them hurt you. She hugged me tightly. "I'm proud of you, Mom. You're stronger than anyone I know." I smiled softly. "Maybe. But I'm also finally at peace." It wasn't revenge that satisfied me, it was peace. Looking back, I realized that being called too poor was the beginning of my richest chapter. Life has a way of humbling us, healing us, and reminding us that pain is often the soil where strength grows. If someone had told me years ago that the same woman who once scrubbed diner floors would one day be standing here fulfilled, respected, and loved, I would have laughed. But now, every piece of that journey feels like it was meant to happen exactly as it did. Each morning, I wake up before the sun rises and watch the light spill across our garden. Robert sits by the window, reading the paper, his glasses slipping down his nose. Sometimes I make us breakfast. Sometimes he insists on doing it himself, saying, "A man should earn his wife's company, even in the kitchen." We laugh at that, still a little surprised at how easily happiness found its way back into our lives. Lila visits often now. Her career has taken a quieter path. She's no longer chasing status or approval. Instead, she works closely with our foundation, managing programs for women starting their first businesses. She's found her purpose, and with it, her peace. Every time I see her helping another woman rise, I feel a quiet sense of pride. Not because of what I taught her, but because she chose to learn. One Sunday afternoon, as we sat together under the pergola, she said, "Mom, do you ever think about how different life would have been if things hadn't fallen apart?" I smiled. "All the time. But if things hadn't fallen apart, I never would have learned how to rebuild." She nodded thoughtfully, her hand resting over mine. "I'm glad you did. You didn't just rebuild your life, Mom. You rebuilt mine, too. It's moments like that that make everything worth it. The long nights, the tears, the humiliation, all of it led us here. And when I see her now, strong and kind, I know the cycle of shame we once lived through has been broken. Our women's initiative has grown beyond anything I ever dreamed. We've opened centers in 3 cities, providing housing, education, and grants to women who are ready to take charge of their lives. We've watched single mothers become business owners, students become mentors, and survivors become leaders. Every success story reminds me of that rainy night at the diner when I handed my umbrella to a lonely man, the night that unknowingly changed everything. Sometimes, Robert and I attend charity galas together, not to show off, but to share the power of second chances. Reporters often ask how I went from being a single mother working 2 jobs to the founder of a successful program. My answer never changes: by refusing to give up on myself. The truth is, I didn't set out to prove anyone wrong. I set out to survive, to keep moving, to believe that maybe the future still had something kind waiting for me. And when I finally stopped chasing other people's approval, that's when life opened its doors. Robert's health has improved lately. The doctors say the peace in his life has done more good than any medication. Sometimes, he still calls me my miracle, though I always tease him that he's mine. In quiet moments, I'll catch him watching me with that same soft smile he had the day he proposed. I think he loves the woman I've become not because of what I've achieved, but because of how I've healed. Every now and then, we take the Rolls-Royce out for a drive, not for the attention, but for the symbolism. That car, once the emblem of my daughter's judgment, has become a reminder of transformation. The first time it stopped in front of her wedding, it represented the power she underestimated. Now, when it rolls down the old neighborhood streets where I once walked to work, it represents something deeper, the proof that no beginning, no matter how humble, can define your ending. Sometimes I park it outside the old diner, just to sit and look at the building that held my earliest dreams. The neon sign still flickers, and through the window, I see waitresses rushing between tables, just like I used to. One of them recognized me once and came out, nervous and excited. "Are you really Mrs. Harrington? I read about you," she said, smiling. I laughed softly. "Yes, I am. But once I was just Evelyn, the tired waitress who spilled coffee more often than she served it right." She smiled shyly. "And now you're everything." I shook my head. "No, dear. I just finally learned who I was meant to be." Driving away that day, I looked into the rearview mirror and saw my reflection older. Yes, but not weary. Strong. At peace. Whole. Lila often joins me on those drives now. We roll through the city streets, the wind teasing our hair as we laugh about everything and nothing. The past no longer hurts. It simply reminds us how far we've come. As I tell this story, my story, I know it's not one of revenge, though it began with pain. It's a story of reclamation, of love rediscovered, of dignity restored. I learned that sometimes life doesn't give you what you think you deserve, because it's waiting to see what you'll build instead. When I think of that day, the one when my daughter told me I was too poor for her wedding, I no longer feel anger. I feel gratitude. Because that wound forced me to rise, to see my own worth, to find love and respect on my own terms. And now, when I step out of that Rolls-Royce, I don't see luxury. I see victory. Not over her, not over anyone else, but over the woman I used to be. Frightened, small, and uncertain of her place in the world. I've come full circle. And as I close this chapter of my life, I realize the truth. I wish every woman could know that your worth isn't measured by what others see, but by what you refuse to let them take from you. I may have arrived in a Rolls-Royce that day, but the real journey was learning that true wealth lives in self-respect.